So first of all, Matilda, can you tell us a little bit about you?
Yes, as you said, I'm the project manager of Pharma Office at RISE, the host of this breakfast seminar. I've been working at RISE for about 2.5 years, and before that I have a kind of combined experience of work from academia, healthcare, and governmental agencies. And besides working in projects in drug development field, I am the director of a unit at RISE that tests drug candidates in vivo.
And Pharma Office, why did you start Pharma Office?
Pharma Office has been a project at RISE for 3 years, where we have gathered the expertise within RISE and analyzed the needs, both the internal needs and the external needs in drug development. So at RISE, we are more than 200 people who work in the within drug development. And for example, it could be physical chemistry, formulation, analysis, toxicology, and much more. We have a wide range of experience and a high degree of competency. Roughly 2/3 of the employees are PhDs. Half of us has the experience of the pharma industry, primarily as former employees at a large pharma company here in Södertälje, where I am located. And the purpose of Pharma Office has been to gather all of the RISE expertise in the drug development and to give customers an easy access to the wide range of support that we can give. So Pharma Office aims to be one point of entry for drug development at RISE.
Great. I should ask what is offered, but I think you already answered a lot of it.
I can keep on talking about that. Well, Pharma Office can be your long-term strategic partner in drug development. RISE offers a unique and broad competence within the entire pharmaceutical development chain, from idea to safe product. You can get help with everything from basic research to support in the manufacturing process and regulatory safety studies. But in a large research institute, as we are, we also find solutions for problems that are unique. If you have a problem that you don't even know who to ask to get any help, then it is to RISE you should turn to. The cross-functional collaboration that exists between RISE researchers creates solutions to the most unusual problems that may arise along your process to market.
And topic today is AI. Why that topic? Why AI?
Well, AI is a kind of developing research field, and RISE we want to help SMEs and to contribute. Our AI researchers are prepared to help, but we don't need, we need to know where to focus our efforts. So that's why we start with an introduction to the topic by Erik today, and then hopefully take up the conversation about AI in drug development.
Thank you so much, Matilda. We could talk a lot longer, but we will do in the end of the program, actually. So if you have any question or comment to Matilda, please leave them in the chat and we will talk about it later. Because now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to present our keynote speaker. AI within the pharma industry. Welcome to our researcher in AI, Erik Ylipää. And Erik, you can share your screen.
Yes, so thank you very much. So as Cecilia said, my name is Erik Ylipää, and I'm a researcher in AI in the Intelligent Systems unit. So my background is in computer science, but when I started at RISE, or formerly SIX, in 2014, I started working with machine learning. And since then, I've worked with a lot of applied machine learning in a variety of fields. So from computer vision, natural language processing, to time series analysis and music modeling, to mention a few. But these last couple of years, my focus has been on using AI for chemistry. And in particularly, we've looked at helping drug development and toxicology. So first of all, a couple of headlines. So many of you have probably seen these kind of headlines. So these are some of the hype surrounding AI, in particular for drug development. So we see from really large and heavy hitters how they promote the use of AI, and this is something which I assume that most of you have seen. So I will talk a bit about this and try to give you a bit more in-depth kind of guide through some of the parts where AI are being used. So first of all, kind of the overview of where it is being used. So in this review by Paul et al., they try to map where AI is being used in the pharmaceutical industries and in drug discovery. So you can see these applications of AI, it spans a lot of the pharma industry, but in particular what we've seen is probably in the drug discovery field. So what's circled here is in particular what we at RISE have been looking at. So in drug discovery, for example, looking at toxicity prediction. But if we look closer to this field of drug discovery, one can kind of divide it into subfields. So AI in drug design, AI in polypharmacology, AI in chemical synthesis, in drug repurposing, and in drug screening. So here at RISE, what we've currently been working on is primarily in drug screening and in chemical synthesis. I'll mention a bit about our work there and try to explain kind of how AI can be used there. But before I delve into that, I thought I'd take a chance to talk a bit more about, what is AI? So this is a picture you might have seen before, but essentially AI is about building machines which can solve problems that humans solve using our intelligence. So that's a pretty wide definition and doesn't really pinpoint it, but that's common with this field because it's really hard to actually define what intelligence is. But what we often, when we talk about AI, often we mean something more narrow than this general definition. So one can think of AI as a very vast field consisting of a lot of different techniques to actually do this, solve problems using machines which humans solve using their intelligence. But in that field, there are certain subfields which try to attack this fundamental problem in different ways. And one of the most important ones today, or one of the most publicized ones at least, is machine learning. So in this field, we try to build machines which learn through experience. And as subfields of machine learning, there is something called representational learning. I will briefly talk about this, primarily because it is the field in which these techniques called deep learning are used. So today, when people talk about AI, and for example, AI in drug development, it's mostly machine learning which we mean, but we say AI. So what I will talk about throughout this presentation will really be about machine learning. And in particular, I will focus on this subfield of machine learning called deep learning. But we'll start this kind of explanation about machine learning to talk about one of the fundamental questions of AI. How do we represent our problem or our data to make automated decision making simple? So this is kind of, if we can solve this problem, represent data well, then a lot of AI is kind of simple programming. But it turns out that this is actually one of the hard problems. So to illustrate this, let's start with this toy example, where the exact same data set. So this is a data set consisting of two classes. So you see this magenta and this teal class. So depending on how we choose to represent this data, now this is a toy example. In reality, we can't do these simple transformations. But to the left here, we have, let's call them regular Cartesian coordinates, where the data is kind of difficult to separate easily. But if we choose another representation, so in this case, polar coordinates, then solving this classification problem becomes much easier. So this is to highlight how important representations can be. And in the field of chemistry, one of the fundamental questions about how to use machine learning for this field has been one of representation. So how do we represent these compounds, these molecules, which can be almost arbitrarily large and can consist of many different elements, and these elements or atoms can be joined together in very different ways. So this has long been a challenge for machine learning and for the field of chemoinformatics. I should say that using machine learning for chemistry is not something new. This has been done for decades. But conventionally, the problem has really been to go from this complicated structure to a set of numbers which we can feed into our machine learning algorithms. I'm calling this conventional molecular representations. So essentially derive some kind of numerical descriptors for our molecules based on some kind of features we can easily calculate. Or for example, use some kind of indicators for the presence of certain structures. These have been commonly used in this field. So what people often try to contrast these conventional methods with is the deep learning methods. So in the conventional methods, we start out with some kind of data set where we have molecules and we have some known activity or some known property of these molecules. For example, whether they block the hERG channel or not. And then we conventionally, we might spend a lot of effort in trying to come up with ways to describe these molecules using a set of numerical values and a fixed set of numerical values. And then we take these features, these representations, this descriptor representation of our molecules and feed them into what we in the deep learning field call shallow models. Models which essentially operate directly on the feature space. And using this, we build these predictive models. Now, the deep learning way of looking at this is to spend very little time on changing the representation, the basic representation of the molecules. So instead of first trying to summarize the molecule in some set of numerical values, we try to feed our machine learning models as raw representation as possible. So for example, using Smile's strings and then using deep neural networks inspired from the natural language processing community, or feeding them graphs, molecules represented as mathematical graphs, and feeding them into graph neural networks. And the idea with this method is that we retain as much as we can of the information about the molecule, about the structure, before feeding it into our neural network. And then by using numerical optimization, our neural network is able to learn what features are important for molecules, essentially able to learn something analogous to these handcrafted molecular descriptors. And one of the major advancements in this field in the last decade is that of graph neural networks. So I will not delve deep into the details here. I just want to briefly say that these are a kind of machine learning models which allows us to operate directly on graphs as inputs. So we can essentially learn directly from graphs without first having to summarize them into some numerical values. And then using optimization, learn what features of graphs are actually useful. And at RISE, we have done exhaustive experiments to compare these kind of methods with each other. So what you see here, the GNN to the left here, and the DNN. These are these methods which do not rely on descriptors, while the remaining methods rely on descriptor. What we can actually say from this is, well, it doesn't seem like there is much of a difference between the best performing model using descriptors and graph neural networks. So one could say that, well, okay, we don't seem to gain much from neural networks. It is also true that we don't lose much, that we are essentially competitive with methods which have had a very long time to be developed, using almost no domain knowledge injected into these neural networks. And one other important thing to think about is the kind of time trade-offs we can make with these. So one of the downsides of these descriptor-based methods is that calculating the descriptors is often a time-consuming thing. On the other side, on the other hand, a downside with graph neural networks or neural networks in general is that training these models often take a lot of time. So what we looked at here is essentially the time it takes to train the models up here, where you can see that there is almost a 150 time difference between these. So these descriptor-based models, XGBoost here, is about not 200 times, but about 160 times faster to train than the graph neural networks. On the other hand, since these models are developed to be used for virtual screening, the actual prediction time it takes, so how long does it take for the model to make a prediction on a new previously unseen compound? And here these numbers differ vastly. So here we kind of have the opposite relationship, where this prediction time for the descriptor-based models is really dominated by the time it takes to predict these or compute these descriptors. While these graph neural networks, which operates directly on the molecules as a graph, takes much less time. So if we need to screen a lot of compounds, then after about 300,000, we can see that we start to actually earn back the time we spent at training these models. So while this is one perspective to have on these methods, I think a more interesting development using neural networks for drug development is really that of generative models. So you might have seen these kinds of examples popping up lately. So the ability of these generative models, so essentially machine learning models, which are able to generate data, they have improved tremendously over the last couple of years. In particular for these kind of examples where we have a lot of training data consisting of images. So just this spring, this is an example from a model called DALL-E 2 from OpenAI, where the kinds of images they can now generate. So all of the images you see here are generated by a deep neural network conditioned on a text prompt. So for example, on the left-hand side here, the model has been asked to generate an image based on the prompt, teddy bears mixing sparkling chemicals as mad scientists as digital art. And here's just one of the samples, and you can see that model is able to sample a lot of images which are actually of really high quality. And we've seen the same idea being used in drug development. So something generally called inverse design or data-driven design is methods of using machine learning to speed up how we investigate some kind of experiment landscape or design space. So traditionally we might have tried to enumerate or search in the chemical space, so in the space of molecules, by doing discrete alterations to molecules, and then through some forward method, for example, using density functional theory, might try to estimate the properties of these molecules. And this has two issues. So one of them is that this design space, it's discrete. So in making a step in it, which leads to a better molecule, is hard. And also that typically computing this forward function is also very hard. So what we've seen recently is going the inverse. So essentially, if we have some kind of model of this functional space, and in particular, if we look at these examples from 2017-18, what we can try to do is map molecules to a continuous space in which we can try to learn a relationship between some property we want to optimize. So in this case, they look at solubility and try to learn how that property of molecules based on this space. And then doing the exploration in this space instead of in the molecule space, which has shown to be much more efficient. So essentially, this is a field of drug development where AI is showing great promise. But I think one of the even more important things to take from this, and in particular when it comes to deep learning for drug development, is really that of it being a very general method. So this is taken from a very influential AI researcher. So one of the founding researchers in the field called reinforcement learning, Richard Sutton. So he wrote this kind of opinion piece about how AI research has this bitter lesson, which we have a hard time learning. So what he makes the argument that in AI, general methods that use large amounts of computations prove to be the most effective. And this is kind of in contrast to methods where AI researchers build in knowledge into their agents. And while that helps short term, he argues that in the long term, these methods will be beaten by the methods which are general and leverage computation, and essentially because computation continues to increase. Now, while I share this perspective, I also think that in particular for drug development, there are some problems. And one commenter who often kind of acts as a cold water bucket in this case, so Derek Lowe, here is from his science column. So he writes a lot about drug development. In particular, he's commented a lot about AI in drug development, where his view is that AI has not really led to any significant advancement yet. And while I might not agree completely with this, so I think the point he makes here that actually a lot of the issues we have in drug development currently is kind of in the kind of data we have. And I also think perhaps the kind of promises that these headlines we saw in the beginning make. But I do believe that we can make great efforts, and also that we've already seen that, for example, virtual screening makes great use of AI methods and have for a long time. So I think the perspective from the headlines we saw in the beginning is perhaps a bit overhyped. The goal should not be to, for example, replace whole steps of drug development with AI. So for example, if we think of retrosynthetic analysis, we have this dream that, given some desired compound, we should be able to make or build a computational tool which directly tells us how to create this compound. But that's kind of the wrong picture of how this is done in reality. In reality, this is a long process with many detours and complicated interactions between, really skilled chemists with databases and with colleagues, and a lot of trial and error experiments. So I think the perspective we should have on what AI can do for this process is really that it should support the easy parts. So for example, if we think about route design or route discovery, we shouldn't aim to directly replace the whole process currently, but rather we should try to make certain parts of it easier and faster. So for example, making AI help process chemists with yield prediction. So provided that the chemists have an idea of some reaction to perform, but don't find anything in the literature, then be able to predict is this a good reaction or not, to predict the yield. So while there are different perspectives on AI in drug discovery, one fact remains clear, and that is that this is actually something where a lot of things are happening. So this is just from the same review as before, kind of an overview of how many of the large players in the field partner up with other entities or buy up other entities to really improve how they do drug development using AI. And we know a lot of the big players have their own AI development teams. So for example, AstraZeneca has been very successful here. So one question which we here today want to ask is really what can RISE do for you in the future? So currently we've been focusing on parts of the drug discovery application of AI, but what we really would like to hear is, where is the need from Swedish actors for AI, and where can we help you? So essentially what Matilda and Cecilia started talking about, what can RISE do for you in the future? So what are your needs and what are your ideas? So with that, I would like to thank you all for listening. And if you have some some questions, I have a couple of minutes now that I can answer them.